Hi, seventh graders. Today in social studies, while you guys are at home, we're going to be working in our Unit 2 13 Colonies packet, which looks like this. And we're going to start taking notes on page 4. So we're going to review which colonies are the New England colonies, and you can label them New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And just pay attention to the fact that Maine is still part of Massachusetts at this point, so it's not labeled separately. Vermont is also not one of the 13 colonies. New York and New Hampshire fight over Vermont, but it's not one of the 13 colonies, and it doesn't become its own state until later. Life in the New England colony really began with settlers coming from England to New England for religious freedom. So you guys will be filling in what's bolded on the screen. These settlers were initially aiming for Virginia, where farming would have been a little easier, but got off track and ended up landing in Massachusetts. Farming was difficult because the winter was long and cold and the soil was very rocky. New Englanders had to find other ways of making money besides farming because they could really only have small farms. So they end up lumbering, fishing, shipbuilding, and trade became the focus of their economy. We're going to move on now to page 5. And here's just a reminder of the middle colonies. So we've got New York, which is shaped pretty differently from New York today. Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware are the 4 middle colonies. Like the New England colonies, people from England moved to the middle colonies for religious freedom. Particularly the Quakers moved to Pennsylvania looking for religious freedom. Because the Quaker religion has as one of its important values equality, other cultures and religions were tolerated in the middle colonies. Tolerated is when you are welcoming to people who are different. So it was a place in the 13 colonies which provided religious freedom and were tolerant and treated pretty well Native Americans, especially compared to the treatment Native Americans faced in other colonies. The fertile soil in the middle colonies allowed people to make money farming. They did a lot of production of grains, so they were called the breadbasket colonies because they grew crops that would be turned into bread. Trade and shipbuilding were also prevalent, including the slave trade in New York. Moving on to page 6, we've got the southern colonies, and the southern colonies is the only region with 5 colonies: Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Maryland is probably the one that 7th graders mix up the most because it's on the same latitude as Delaware, but is considered a southern colony mostly because of the geography and economy in Maryland were more similar to the other southern colonies than to the middle colonies. So it's more the culture and the economy that determines what region the colonies are in, less so where it lines up on the map. Please also notice that Florida is not one of the 13 colonies. At this point, it's going to be controlled by Spain. The southern colonies featured broad rivers and vast wetlands, and this gave the southern colonies really fertile soil. There's also warmer weather, so it was perfect for growing cotton, rice, and other cash crops. Cash crops are crops that you can basically grow so many crops that you can have enough to live on, and then you can sell the rest and make a lot of money. So we're going to see slavery develop in the South from the very beginning of the founding of the 13 colonies, as we see wealthy colonists relying on enslaved Africans to harvest their fields. So slavery is part of the story from the very beginning. Slavery in the South was part of a triangle trade system. So the English have set up the colonies in North America really just to make money. That is the purpose of the colonies, from the point of view of the king. So the colonies were a good source of resources like lumber, fish, and tobacco. The English could get these resources very cheaply from their colonies. They could also force their colonies to import things made from these raw materials. So by 1750, they were making a lot of money. England was making a lot of money via the colonies. And as they become more reliant on the colonies economically, they're going to start to pay very close attention to what was going on there. And we'll see in that new level of attention the beginnings of the American Revolution. So basically, the triangle trade system worked. So starting in Africa, rum and guns, enslaved Africans were shipped to the West Indies. This is sort of like where Columbus was. And then molasses and sugar were the raw materials taken from the West Indies, which would come up to the 13 colonies and be turned into rum, and then guns would be shipped back to Africa, where they could pick up slaves, bring them to the West Indies, eventually up into the colonies, and it would just keep going round and round. So this is basically how slavery begins as part of the economy of the 13 colonies. So the colonies are run on an economic system known as mercantilism, and that's the idea that colonies are created by a mother country like England, and the purpose of the colonies is to benefit the mother country. The people there may have come for religious freedom, but the only reason England has colonies is to really make money. The colony provides very cheap raw materials and a guaranteed market for finished products. So in order to enforce the idea of mercantilism, that the colonies were to make money for England, the Navigation Acts were passed by Parliament. Parliament is like England's Congress. They make laws that everyone in England has to follow. They were passed, actually everyone in England and the colonies had to follow. So the laws forced colonists to trade only with England or England's colonies. And there were serious penalties for smuggling. And smuggling is when you traded illegally. So an illegal trade would be someone from the colonies trading with Spain or France or some other country besides England. And the Navigation Act resulted in the triangle trade route, where going in between England, Africa, and the colonies, where rum, molasses, enslaved Africans were transported on these routes. And so while it made a lot of money for people, this whole economic system had at its roots slavery. So we see the colonies' economy being very much founded on slavery. So hopefully that got you through the notes from pages 4 to 7 in the Unit 2 packet. Thanks for your attention.